In this video, we're going to be replacing the front passenger side strut in this 2013 Hyundai Elantra. We'll be reusing the old spring from the old strut, and we'll be putting it back in the vehicle. I'm going to remove the front wheel. I'm going to do that with a 21mm socket. With a 10mm socket, we're going to remove our speed sensor bracket and our brake hose bracket from the strut assembly. We'll do that now. So we need to remove or take this top cowl out of the way so we can gain access to the top of our strut and the strut bolts. There should be clips in here and across the top holding this piece in place. Somebody's already been in here before us and didn't put them back. But now will be the time to remove these clips. All right, so we have this windshield washer hose running into our cowl. I'm going to follow it down towards the headlight, find our connection here and just separate it, pull it apart. We can set that aside. Now up top here, you have to pop this panel off. Just going to use a panel tool. Set that aside. So here you can see whoever was in this vehicle before us broke this trim piece. We need to be careful of that, but remove this piece on the side here also. We're just going to pry up, and with the trim tool, set that aside. Now that we have our two side pieces here removed, you can see we still have a little restricted access. Our wipers are in the way. So with the pick tool, we'll remove the covers. A 14mm socket, we'll remove our wipers. Do the same over here. Now, these will be press fit on, so you're going to want to pull them straight out. You may have to work it out and back a little bit. We can just set this aside. We can, sometimes if you pull the wiper blade up a little bit off the windshield, and then pull the back part of the arm. With our wipers removed, now we can remove this cowl piece. And set this aside. Now we have access to our top strut bolts. They're a 15mm, so we will remove those now. So what you want to do is put a jack or a jack stand underneath your control arm, preferably a jack so that you can control it up and down, and support your control arm while you're working on your strut. Once you have all the bolts and things removed, you're going to want to lower your control arm a little bit to help you gain more access. All right, now we're going to remove our top bolt from our sway bar link to our strut. It's a 19mm socket. All right, now that we've broken it free, we're going to need to back it up with a wrench behind here. All right, it's going to be an 18mm wrench. You can move that out of the way. All right, so now we're going to remove our strut from the knuckle. You're going to need a 19mm wrench and a 17mm socket. Now we can lower our control arm, which will allow us to pull the strut out of the top. And what we did was put a screwdriver through the bolt hole just to hold it in place. Once we're free of the top, we can go ahead and remove our screwdriver and take our strut out. So we've set up our strut and our strut compressor. Now that it's in there level and even, we're going to apply pressure downwards and compress the spring. Once we have the spring compressed, we'll remove this top nut, the 17mm socket. We'll try and impact that top nut off. Just want to be cautious of the strut assembly falling straight out onto your feet. I can set that aside. All right, so we're going to remove the boot off of our old strut. What you want to do is just make sure the inside's clean and free of any debris. All right, with a 14mm wrench, go ahead and turn the top, and your piston will slide out to full length. Now we can assemble it on this strut compressor. All right, what we're going to do is look for the end of the spring. We're going to put it in front of this tab on the bottom of the strut, like that. Then what we can do is take our old boot, slide it on top and down into place on our new strut. Then we're going to take our rubber isolator, place that on top. Again, if you're reusing the old parts, we're going to try and line up identifying areas to match where they've worn into. So we're just going to line this up in the same place it was before. Go ahead and take your top. Line up the flat spot on this top shaft here, the flat spot on there. You can drop your top plate on. And now we can put our washer and our nylon lock nut. All right, now with a 19mm socket, we're just looking to tighten that up enough to hold the assembly together while we release the spring into position. So now you want to remember to keep your spring and your spring stop aligned on the bottom of your strut. And we're going to release pressure on the spring assembly. As you go, just slowly watch, make sure everything's lining up and sitting into position where it needs to be. So far, everything's looking pretty good. All right, before you release full tension on that spring, you want to keep just a little bit of tension on there, basically just to hold the assembly for you. That should be good. Now we'll tighten down that top nut. Again, we're going to tighten it up with the 19mm socket. All right, now we'll torque this nut down to 45 foot-pounds. It's going to be really difficult to get that to spin because the cylinder inside spins. If you can get this to torque to 45 foot-pounds, great. If not, get it as tight as you possibly can. So now we'll put the old cap back on the cover. We can remove it from this machine and put it back in the vehicle. All right, so now we're going to install our new strut assembly. We're just going to line up the top bolts they're not going to stay there. We're just going to get somewhat in place. And then on the bottom, what we're going to do, let's just use a screwdriver through the bottom bolt hole, just to hold that in place for us. And now what we can do, slowly raise our suspension back up. We're going to get somewhat close on the top so we can align these bolts back through. Now that we have them aligned, we can keep raising. What you want is a little movement on your knuckle here to be able to put your bolts in place. If you go too high, you won't be able to do that. All right, now what we're going to do is start reinstalling our bolts through the strut to the knuckle. We're just going to angle and wedge our screwdriver, help us align the holes. All right, once you have one bolt at least halfway through, you can remove your screwdriver. Go ahead with the second. What you don't want to do here is just start hammering these through. You'll end up ruining the threads on the bolts. Take your time. Now we'll thread our nuts on. And with a 19mm wrench on the nut side and a 17mm socket on the bolt side, we'll snug these up. All right, now we'll torque these down to 105 foot-pounds. All right, so we'll reinstall our sway bar link. On the back side here, you're going to need a 17mm. On the front side, we're going to use a 19mm socket. We're just going to snug this up. With that 17mm on the back. We're going to torque the sway bar bolt to 75 foot-pounds. All right, so we're going to reinstall our speed sensor cable and our brake hose. There is a tab on the bottom of this bracket. Let's make sure that's locked into place there. We're just going to start both bolts. Same thing with this one. There is a tab on the top. All right, with a 10mm socket, we'll tighten those down. All right, now we can lower our control arm support. All right, now we can lower the vehicle and put our nuts back on the top. All right, so in our case, we had the vehicle on the lift, we worked on it from underneath, then we lowered the pole jack. We couldn't get to these studs while it was in the air, so we had to lower it. To get these studs to come all the way back through, we had to put a jack back under our control arm. If you're at home and you can get to the top and bottom, leave your jack underneath the control arm while you put these nuts back on. With a 15mm socket, we'll snug these up. All right, so once you have your 3 nuts up top snugged up, you have a couple options. You can put your wheel back on, let the car settle to ride height, or you can keep a jack or a jack stand underneath your control arm at about ride height before you torque them down. And we've done the jack underneath the control arm, so now we're going to torque these down to 40 foot-pounds. All right, so now we can reinstall our plastic cowl trim. I'm going to line up both sides. It's going to go down and in and over your windshield wipers. Again, ours is broke, so this side will be a little different. And just center your wipers in that hole. All right, so before we can finish up with the cowl piece, we'll put our trim pieces back on. If you look on the inside of them, there's a few grooves and a few clips. This clip here is going to line up here. The hardest part of these pieces are these 2 front clips that go up in here. So sometimes what I like to do is start with those. Sometimes they'll fight you. All right, now we can put our windshield wipers back on. If you happen to have forgotten which side is which, if you flip over and you look in the arm, you'll see a stamp. This is driver's side. So you're going to get them as close to the park position as you can. What you're going to do is flatten this angle to slide them back over the studs. Before you do that, see if you can get it lined up to the park position. And just press them into place the best you can. And then we'll reinstall the nut. This one actually has a stamping on the outside that says DR for driver as well. Some don't have that, they're on the inside. While we're here on this side, we'll go ahead and put the passenger in place. We'll flatten that a little. Line it up to the park position. And press it on. And now we'll go ahead and thread our nut down. And with the 14mm socket, we'll snug these up. And we'll torque these nuts down to 17 foot-pounds. And because you're putting tension on the motor, just hold the blade in place. Now we can reinstall the covers. Just push them down. This clip here is where your hose will go through. You have to take the clip out, open it, put your hose inside. Before we clip that down, I'm just going to make this connection, press it together. Press your clip back into place. Now would be the time to reinsert your clips. You have one here, you have a couple across the top here, one down on the opposite side. Our vehicle didn't come with them. We don't have any to reinstall. If you did have them, go ahead and put them back in now. All right, so now we'll reinstall our wheel. Put a couple lug nuts on by hand. Tighten them down with a 21 millimeter. We're going to go in a crisscross pattern, and then we'll come back and torque them down. Now we're going to torque our wheel down to 70 foot-pounds. We're going to do it in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.